Welcome to this webinar, Inclusive Design in Action, Maximizing Accessibility in Blackboard. Some helpful information for this webinar. Closed captions are available on the WebEx platform. They can be found in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Please use the screenshot on this slide as a guide. Please note that the use of third-party AI generator software is not permitted for note-taking or recording of this session unless prior permission has been granted. Here is our agenda for the webinar so that all attendees have a more concrete idea of what will be covered. We are currently in the Welcome and Introduction section, to be followed by Contextualizing Accessibility in Education, Modernizing to Ultra, Common Accessibility Issues, Final Thoughts, and Resources and Sources. My name is Dr. Katie Grinnell, and I will be delivering today's webinar. First and foremost, I identify as a proud disabled woman. This naturally then means that accessibility is extremely near and dear to my heart, both professionally and personally. I currently work as an accessibility strategist here at Anthology. So in this role, I support both institutions and organizations in their usage and adoption of Ally, our digital accessibility tool. I have a PhD in American Studies with a focus in disability studies and history. I am a former education consultant and account manager, also working with Anthology. I have been teaching for over 17 years as an adjunct instructor at the undergraduate level in the fields of history and disability studies. I've taught at Hilbert College, Damon University, Buffalo State University, University of Buffalo. There's a theme here. All of these schools are in the Buffalo, New York region where I'm from. I've also taught exclusively online courses for Southern New Hampshire University. I had the distinct pleasure of co-writing a book called Disability and Accessibility in the Music Classroom, an Instructor's Guide in 2022. Yes, I do know the D. With a wonderful musicology professor, Alexandra Carrico. So very happy to be able to share that, just to give you a bit of a background of where I'm coming from in terms of my approach to accessibility. At the end of this webinar, learners will be able to identify common accessibility issues to address, apply best practices for accessible course design, and develop an accessibility-focused approach for your modernization process. Let us begin by contextualizing accessibility in education. For those of you that are more statistically oriented, this slide provides important disability statistics, all taken from the World Health Organization. In the top right-hand corner, the first rectangle that is containing statistical information we'll consider today is that 26% and more of adults in the United States currently are disabled. Below that, 1 in 6 people worldwide are disabled. And below that, 60 to 80% of disabled students choose not to disclose their disability. So this means that they do not share that they are disabled with a professor, an accommodations officer, the accessibility services office, etc. And reasons for this can run the gamut, but are typically due to fear of retribution or discrimination, concern over lack of support or accommodations, or perhaps there is some past trauma or anxiety from a negative disclosure experience previously. It's also interesting to point out that disability is the only minority or marginalized group that everyone can and probably will join at some point in their lives. So while it may seem like a very far away concept or something that isn't specifically relevant to us, it's always there as a possibility. And especially if we consider it from a statistical standpoint, it is in many ways an inevitability. So if we expand the scope of our context discussion to why accessibility is important in education, so we're switching gears here from looking at things statistically and now looking at it more holistically of these different kind of impact areas, if you will, where accessibility will essentially have some type of direct impact in these different spaces. So we have recruitment, retention, learner satisfaction, and legal requirements. From a recruitment perspective, addressing accessibility helps reach a greater number of potential students. It also provides a more accessible recruitment experience for those students. And hopefully by proving and showing that there are more accessible, materials to engage with, this provides it helps to ease some anxiety, or it is promising in that the institution or the organization is considering how important it is to have accessible content right out of the gate. It can also align with institutional missions or initiatives. Retention-wise, it strengthens the inclusive learning environment by, again, reaching a greater and broader number of students, including those that are disabled. From a learner satisfaction perspective, what accessibility does in education, right, is that it helps to strengthen a strong sense of belonging and inclusion, and really, again, allows for more confidence in engagement within the educational space for students, for all students. So it also increases satisfaction when all students can equitably participate and engage in their learning and feel that sense of belonging, feel that they have a voice, feel that they matter. Our last category speaks broadly to the legal and regulatory requirements. With increasing developments in accessibility-related policies and legislation, such as the update to Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act and also the European Accessibility Act, ensuring our content is accessible is even more important. So the inclusion of digital accessibility in policies and legislation emphasizes the need to ensure that all students do have equitable access to their content. I've always found it a best practice from a pedagogical perspective to define what it is that we're talking about so that we can use that as a foundation, if you will, and build upon it from there. So here we're looking at the definition and a little bit of a discussion of digital accessibility. So what I've included here is a definition of digital accessibility. It belongs to Georgetown Law. And it reads, digital accessibility refers to the inclusive practice of removing barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites, digital tools and technologies by people with disabilities. So if we think about how this concept, how this definition, digital accessibility, relates directly to your modernization efforts, right? So we're making that overarching connection here. We need to consider the type of content that would fall under the purview of digital accessibility. So this could include, but is not limited to, Word documents, PowerPoints, PDFs, images, WYSIWYG content. WYSIWYG is an acronym that stands for what you see is what you get. So that refers specifically to the content that you are building directly in your courses within Blackboard. So these are all examples of types of content that would absolutely fall under digital accessibility. And thus we need to ensure that they are accessible and equitable for all students. I think it's also helpful to think about why this matters. So we've done this already in a couple of different ways. We've looked at it statistically. We've looked at the different impact areas that having accessible content from the beginning can really, again, start to make a difference. But let's take this a little bit of a step further and think about it more from a moral perspective. Why accessibility matters. Accessibility is always the right thing to do, even considering all of the changes in regards to accessibility laws and standards and regulations. It's still important to make sure we're adhering to those, but at its core, it's always the right thing to do because it helps provide access to as many possible folks, many possible people as possible. That is always kind of the overarching why of why I personally am committed to accessibility, but specifically my work here at Anthology and what we do in terms of accessibility and Ally. This is always the kind of the purpose, the mission. Having accessible content and an accessible experience affords learners more autonomy in their learning engagement. This provides them the ability to go in and decide that they need to access something in a way that suits their preferences or their needs. There's a lot of power in that. There is a lot of autonomy in that. And having more autonomy, having more flexibility, this just creates a stronger, more flexible learning environment that, again, is giving back that autonomy to learners, to students, to feel more engaged and connected to their material. Accessibility matters because it also removes barriers or obstacles that prevent disabled or those that are not disabled from engaging with their learning content. And I specifically included the not disabled component here because there are a lot of folks that are not disabled but benefit from a lot of universal design features or enhancements, or perhaps they suspect they might be disabled, but they don't have an official diagnosis. Again, we are not necessarily looking for those diagnoses. We're looking to make things as accessible to all people as possible. And ultimately, inclusive design and accessibility improve the experience for all learners. So some of those examples would be closed captions. So even if you're not necessarily hard of hearing or have any type of disability officially when it comes to hearing, having closed captions can be a really helpful feature. So perhaps you're somewhere where you can't turn your volume on and you don't want to bother the folks that are around you, or you're just not in a space where you should or can be doing that. To be able to see the closed captions and still access that content in a way that suits the environment you're in, but also your needs, is extremely helpful. That's an example of universal design, designed to help those that have disabilities and to help break down those barriers. But we do find that those features and enhancements end up really benefiting all people, not just those that are disabled. So now that we have laid the contextual foundation of the importance of addressing accessibility, let us consider how it then relates or pertains to your modernization efforts as you transition to Learn Ultra. So you're modernizing. This is a really exciting time for you on your journey with us here at Anthology and your journey with Blackboard. So we're very excited that you're embarking on this. What we want to do now in this section is really focus on how to incorporate accessibility into those efforts. So let us consider just some of the reasons why right now is a really great time, a really opportune time to address accessibility in your modernization efforts. So to begin, and perhaps the most important, right, it's that it is always a good time to work on accessibility. It doesn't have to happen in a bubble, nor should it, right? It should be kind of this continuous effort that we're consistently making in how we create and sustain our learning environments. So really, again, ensuring that all of our learners have access to their learning content is a fundamental component to creating and sustaining, as I mentioned before, that inclusive teaching and learning environment. So within the confines of the modernization workflow, it is an opportune time to review your content for accessibility because you're already doing that. You can make updates and changes to your content. You can ensure the content is accessible and inclusive to all students. This also extends to our pedagogical commitment of really maintaining engaging courses that are genuinely inclusive to all. So as an instructor myself, I fully understand the challenges of keeping students engaged, particularly in a digital setting. So ensuring that all learners have equitable access to engage in the course secures a higher engagement output. And lastly, considering that you are already in the content course review process as you transition to Ultra, factoring in time to address accessibility really does fit within the larger scope of the project. And ultimately, it will reduce the need to remediate content at a later time. So here we will look at a suggested workflow for addressing accessibility within your modernization efforts. Naturally, this will vary depending on your individual modernization process, but this is what we would suggest to help get started. Step one would be to select one course to focus on at a time. So rather than trying to address all of your courses at the same time and perhaps get overwhelmed by the mere prospect of trying to figure out where to begin, break it into manageable chunks by focusing on just one individual course at a time. So you as the instructor go in and select which course it is you will begin your accessibility efforts with. Step 2 would be to conduct an informal SWOT analysis of your existing course content. Is there outdated or irrelevant content that needs to be removed and or modified? Perhaps you have too many PDFs in your course, and this would justify the need to maybe convert to different format types, or even better, perhaps convert that content to an Ultra doc, which already has excellent built-in accessibility capabilities. How accessible is your overarching content? So these are the types of questions to consider when you're conducting this informal SWOT. The end result of the SWOT analysis doesn't need to be shared with anybody. This is to help you determine your starting point. And the last phase of this suggested workflow consists of the actual work in making your content more accessible, and that would be remediating. We suggest using built-in accessibility checkers and common tools such as Microsoft Word or PowerPoint to address accessible issues in your content. Or if you do have access to our powerhouse digital tool, Anthology Ally, you can use the instructor feedback feature to identify accessibility issues in your content and then to address them based on the context and guidance Ally provides. It would behoove us to take a moment to consider possible approaches for prioritizing our courses to begin with first. So while the previous slide offered a suggested workflow for approaching accessibility in your modernization journey, here we look at some considerations and recommendations for determining which courses to begin with. Selecting where to begin, again, will be up to the individual instructor. So while my answer to that question will always be the favored, it depends, here we do have some suggested questions and considerations to help guide you. So to determine which course or content items you should begin the process with, consider the following questions and factors. Which course will be offered next semester or the soonest? Which has the most content to sort through? Which course has the most accessibility issues? Which course has not been reviewed in quite some time? Or perhaps there is a high volume class, like a general education class, that have a consistently high enrollment number that really, again, will be impacting a large number of students. So these are some suggested considerations and questions for trying to determine which of those courses you should begin with in terms of addressing accessibility within that overarching modernization effort. We will now shift gears to consider common accessibility issues, which will inevitably appear while remediating content in your modernization efforts. One of the most common accessibility issues is missing alternative text. This slide is really designed to provide the what and the why, and then the how. So if we start on the left-hand column here, we're looking at the what and the why. Again, it's always considered a best practice to define the issue. Alternative text refers to a textual description of a photo, a graph, or other image that is used when images are not visible to the learner. So that image might not be visible to the learner based on a vision impairment, or perhaps they are driving and they are currently not able to look at their screen, look at their device. This issue is particularly problematic when it comes to learners that are using assistive technology to read out what is embedded within that image. So this would be a really good example of a screen reader, where a screen reader is to help support students with different types of vision impairments, is reading aloud what is on the actual screen. So if a learner cannot see the image, the alternative text is necessary because it's providing them with that equitable access to the image. Some of the benefits, and there are a lot, of alternative text are that it can be read and it's accessible with assistive technology. It allows images to be searched. This eases navigation. It ensures that all users have access to crucial information contained in the image, making this, again, an equitable experience. And also it will display even if the image fails to load. So this is important even for learners that are not using assistive technology. So that section really focused on the what and the why. So now we can essentially look at the how. There are many different ways one can address adding alternative text to an image, but naturally it depends on the program or tool that you are using. So for example, Word and PowerPoint, two of the most widely used tools by instructors. To actually be able to add alternative text within one of those programs, you can add alt text by right-clicking on the image, or you can go into the Picture Format tab in the ribbon and select View Alt Text or Alt Text. And those are different ways that you can go in and essentially add proper alternative text. It's different for every tool, but again, these are those that are most widely used. Some general tips that might be helpful for adding alternative text. Keep it short while still conveying important information. You want to stay objective. So what we mean here is do not include bias or your perception or your analysis of the image. You want to stick to the facts, and that allows the learner to come to that conclusion or develop their own analysis if that is contextually appropriate. Consider the context. So the same image may have different descriptions based on the audience or purpose. This is why it's so important for individual instructors or course designers to always have the ability to modify and own their alternative text, because they are the subject matter experts and they're the ones designing the content, and they need to ensure that that context is relevant. Lastly, you can actually mark an image as decorative. And by doing this, it means that the assistive technology will essentially skip over that. You only want to do that with something that is purely decorative and is not providing any meaning. So maybe that's an icon that really is just meant to perhaps, provide a better aesthetic look to the slide or the resource or the document, but it's not conveying any meaning. So not including that and not providing alternative text would not be harmful to that learner who wouldn't have access to that, because there's no actual meaning that is there. So while still on the topic of alternative text, I'd like to run a brief alternative text exercise to really help reinforce what we've talked about so far. Here on the screen is an image of a bear. I ask that all of you attending this webinar take a moment to consider which alternative text description listed on the screen fits the image best. Number 1, zoomed in on the face of a brown bear gazing majestically. Perhaps it is hungry or pensive. Number 2, brown bear, grizzly bear, mammal, carnivore. 3, brown bear. 4, close up of a brown bear's face. Take a moment just to consider which you think would be the most fitting alternative text associated with this image. Now that you've had some time to consider, let's walk through what the best choice would be. Of the options presented here on the screen, the best choice would be number 4, close-up of a brown bear's face. This is objective. It's not projecting personal perception or analysis of the image, and it is short, factual, and it is sweet. Number 1 is incorrect. And the reason for this is because it is the individual content creator is projecting that the bear is gazing majestically, or that they're hungry or pensive. This is not a fact. This is not something we can ascertain just by looking at this. All of us could essentially have different perceptions of what this bear is thinking. We don't know it's hungry just by looking at it. But if we're adding in that as a possibility, it's adding bias, it's adding subjectivity. The second is just not very clear. It's just kind of a list of all the things that all the different kind of physical characteristics it could have or be called. The third is too general. So what is the brown bear doing? Is there something in the background that we need to know about? Is it hurt? Is it with other people? What have you? The fourth is really a strong candidate here, and is the best optimal choice, right? It is a close-up of a brown bear's face. It's looking up, We're not sure why. We don't know if the bear is hungry. We don't actually know if it's a grizzly bear. You know, whether or not it's a carnivore is not exactly specifically pertinent to this particular image, though, of course, we do know it's a carnivore. But again, it's really just trying to stick to the facts and make sure that it is completely as objective as possible. So now we'll move on to color contrast, another common accessibility issue. So color contrast refers to the color of the text or an image against the background color. So for example, black text on a white background. Sufficient or high color contrast makes it easier to read the text, particularly in bright environments. Somebody does not have to have a vision impairment in order to have a hard time with insufficient color contrast. It can be very difficult to read something that perhaps has light green text on a white background. Having sufficient color contrast also helps people with visual impairments, color blindness, or low vision, and it ultimately improves the usability of websites and apps. To help determine if your color contrast is sufficient, there are built-in tools and accessibility checkers that you can use. Of course, Anthology Ally will point out if there is insufficient color contrast, but there's also additional tools that are free, like TPGI's Color Contrast Analyzer. Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, Adobe Acrobat for PDFs, those will also point out insufficient color contrast. But some more general tips for ensuring that sufficient color contrast is actually being, practiced. You'd want to use high contrast colors like black on a white background. So that would be something that we would suggest. Another really, big, I would say, accessibility must or, best practice would be not to use color alone to convey meaning. So in other words, if you are creating a document and in that document, you've decided that the subtitle of a new section is going to be colored in red. Well, if somebody has a vision impairment or they have color blindness or other issues, they don't know what that means just by looking at it. So again, that's one example of what we mean when it comes to making sure that you're not using color alone to convey meaning. So just as we did with the alternative text common accessibility issue, we'll now look at we'll do a quick color contrast exercise. So here on this slide, I have two examples of the same text on the slide. So I'd like you to take a moment and really think of these options. On the left, it reads accessible content is better content. The color of the text is yellow and the background is white. On the other hand, we have the same text. It reads accessible content is better content, but the color of that text is black and the background is white. So take a moment and really consider which of these options has sufficient color contrast. Now that you've had a moment to think about that, the option here that does have sufficient contrast is the option on the right. So that is the black text with the white background. The example of insufficient or low color contrast would be that on the left, the yellow text, which is really difficult to discern against the white background. It's the color gradients are kind of working in conflict with one another. So when we say something doesn't have or it has insufficient color contrast or it doesn't have sufficient color contrast, it means that there is a coloring, I would say, discrepancy between the background and the actual color of the text. So in order to make it easier to read and a better experience for all and not painful on the eyes, we want to use something like a black text, a darker color against a white background. Missing headings is another common accessibility issue found in learning content. Headings provide structure and order to a document. So H1 would be heading 1 or H2 is heading 2. Some of the benefits of using heading styles include an ease of navigation, especially for those that do use assistive technology. So screen readers can easily jump between headings to find relevant content quickly so that the actual learner doesn't necessarily need to, go through everything. If they need to just kind of fine tune specific areas in the headings are in proper order, they have the ability to navigate and jump through that quickly just to make it a better reading experience for them. Heading styles are typically larger and more prominent than surrounding text, so it does make it easier to visually navigate the page. So many of us might essentially put the title of a document, as an example, in bold or underline it. Well, while visually we can look at that and maybe assume that that refers to the actual title. What you want to do is use the actual built-in heading styles or feature, if you will, within certain tools like Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, because it's already structured that way. So this way we know that it will be appropriately accessed when using assistive technology. And so what we mean by that is it's coded into that so that if a learner is using assistive technology or a screen reader, it will properly read out heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, if they're not able to see that. It will also, again, give them the ability to kind of jump between headings to get to what they need to. So to add headings, what we encourage is the use of the built-in styles of your software to set headings properly. Keep in mind that putting a title or heading in bold or underlining it or putting it in italics, it doesn't actually create a heading that would be recognized by assistive technology. It's just a visual indicator that perhaps is the title. Some additional tips for making sure that we're using headings properly would be to stay sequential. So do not skip levels. So go from heading 1 to heading 2. It's essentially a hierarchy. And you'll want to use, in a similar vein, heading levels logically. So for example, H1, which refers to heading 1, would be for the title, the main title. Heading 2 for different sections, heading 3 for subsections, etc. Now we will move on to what we refer to as the dreaded scanned PDF. So the best way to describe the relationship between PDFs and accessibility is it's complicated. PDFs are widely used because they maintain formatting and layout regardless of the type of device or operating system a learner is using. But the makeup of a PDF is more complicated, and this is typically what leads to accessibility issues. So in terms of accessibility, one of the biggest issues with PDFs is the scanned PDF. So a scanned PDF is essentially a physical document that was scanned into a PDF file to create a digital copy. Essentially, this is just an image of a document. And so it's missing the key accessibility components like metadata or searchability. That is something that needs to be picked up and be available so that someone using assistive technologies such as a screen reader can access it. There are additional factors that do also degrade the quality of a PDF, particularly those that are scanned. So on the right side of this, we're looking at some of those potential factors. So that could be handwriting over something that is printed, text that has been cut off, poor color contrast, ink-saving font, dark gutters. So sometimes that's referred to as the spine of the book, where you can clearly tell that somebody took a book, flipped it over, pushed it down on the scanner, and then essentially scanned from there. And those dark gutters can just provide a really kind of poor visible experience for learners, many that have impairments. Very small font, multiple generations of scans, coffee stains. You'd be surprised by this. We see this a lot. You can sometimes even see the outline of a paperclip. So while this really talks a little bit about the what and the why and the additional factors that degrade PDF quality, it's still important to note that while there are a lot of problems with PDFs, declaring that we completely get rid of PDFs is not really realistic, right? So let's think a little more about this. So from an accessibility standpoint, we do recommend avoiding PDFs as much as possible. This isn't always attainable, and we completely recognize that. Again, we realize it's not always a reality. So what are some things that we can do to manage the scanned PDFs and manage that overall experience? One of the things that can be done is to convert the actual PDF to a Word document, or even better, an Ultra document. So if you are converting a PDF to Word, just keep in mind that the formatting will likely be a little bit wonky from the conversion, as the two items have different structures, right? So the work, or the look, I should say, on the layout or format is not going to necessarily be the same. So there might be additional work that needs to happen if converting to a Word document. In Ultra, there are a lot of wonderful built-in accessibility features that make the process of, in general, addressing accessibility even easier. So if it comes down to typing out, if you have the ability to copy and paste, that's great. But if it comes down to really typing out what is in the actual PDF and typing that directly into an Ultra doc to make it a better experience, again, there are different accessibility features such as heading structures and the ability to only use certain colors against a white background that, again, make approaching accessibility in that capacity a lot easier for the individual instructor. You can also use digital libraries or collections to be able to locate electronic versions of the PDFs. This happens a lot with institutions or instructors that are in very specific fields, and sometimes locating those PDFs might just require a conversation with the librarian. I've never had a time where I've met or worked with a librarian that hasn't been willing to help. So they're, wonderful resources of information. So that is another great example. If you can't find something yourself and you've already worked within the collections or the digital library, reaching out to the librarian. If you do have autonomy over the content that's selected for your course, you can consider switching to open educational resources if supported by your organization or institution. If you have Anthology Ally, you can also use that in your PDF remediation process. So again, Ally doesn't do the remediation for you. It points out and addresses it helps instructors to address issues that have been detected, and it provides the guidance, detailed instructions on how to address those issues. And lastly, if you have access to Adobe Acrobat Pro, you can use the accessibility checker to address issues directly in the file itself. This depends on if you have an account, if you have the ability to go in and understand how the accessibility checker works. It's a little bit more of a nuanced type of structure, so this might require more time and skill set. So let's start wrapping things up. I promise not to pontificate on the modernization process too much, but I would like to end with some final thoughts. This really is a wonderful opportunity for instructors or course designers to be able to demonstrate your passion for your subject matter and your commitment to excellence in inclusive teaching. Additionally, addressing as many accessibility issues now can absolutely reduce the time retrofitting them later, particularly when you are in a bigger time crunch, or when you are already in the throes of the semester and you're just trying to make sure that everything is there and accessible for your students. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, accessible content is always better content. It makes for a better experience for all learners, regardless of their disability status. And we genuinely here at Anthology believe that accessibility is a journey, and it is a journey that prioritizes progress over perfection. So the intention here is to learn, to grow in our collective knowledge of digital accessibility. It's not to strive for perfection from the outset. So keep this in mind as you work through your modernization process. Celebrate your wins, no matter the size. Anthology support does not end with this webinar. Please consider the following resources for your help in your modernization journey. Here we have the link to our Blackboard Ultra modernization page. There's lots of information there to help guide you in your efforts. We also have our Blackboard help page and also our Blackboard Ally help page. WebAIM.org has a lot of wonderful accessibility related resources and guides and instructions. TPGI is the color contraster that I had mentioned. That's something that you could use. It's a free tool. And then community, the Anthology community, I have the link here for that. And that is essentially our I would say, our digital presence that has best practices. It has different user groups. We have a blog. We have other webinars. We have white papers. There's lots of wonderful resources here that are related to accessibility in general as well. We also have the exemplary course themes and rubric. So this is a high-level intro designed to kind of share the overarching themes of the exemplary course criteria as background. So essentially, it is course design, interaction and collaboration, assessments, and learner support. So if you're interested in learning more about this, we have the link for you here. And we also have some additional Blackboard resources in case you're interested. We've already gone through the first two suggested resources, the modernization website and the anthology community site. The last is what is called our anthology member idea exchange. So you can think of this as essentially a virtual suggestion box where you can provide suggestions for different tools that anthology has and different feature requests or ideas that you think would really make or enhance one of our products. We really genuinely want to hear from you. I did want to include the link to the definition that I included here from Georgetown University, their School of Law, and this was the definition that I used on digital accessibility. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope this was helpful and that it helps you find the right relevant approach to incorporating accessibility into your modernization efforts.